fans, it's your old pal Jordan the Lion. How are you all doing today? I hope you said well. Today we're coming to you from Miami, Florida, and today we are going to go visit and talk about one of the all-time greats. In fact, his nickname was the Great One. The great Jackie Gleason. Daze with Jordan the Lion, it begins right now. Wow, nice guitar. All right, we made it to the Miami M. I can't believe it. Hopefully we can fight off the bad weather that's kind of been surrounding Miami the last couple days. Miami, Miami, you've got style. Yeah, I know, I'm thinking of the Golden Girls. My girlfriend loves that show and we watch it all the time. They sing that song, and even though the show's set in Miami, they didn't film any of the filming locations in Miami. Thank you for being a friend. Bum, 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 bum. Here we are, Our Lady of Mercy Catholic Cemetery. Pretty stunning statue when you first walk in. He's actually not too hard to find because he has one of the biggest ones out here. Actually, it's right out there. See that big white one? So right out here by the side of the lake in the cemetery, you can see they have a sign here that says Gleason Gazebo. This is where a man larger than life, really. I mean, for his time, there was only one Jackie Gleason, that's for sure. Huge. Very fitting of his lifestyle. I mean, the guy he loved living large. Living large and leaving nothing left. And you'll notice at the base, just says a few things. And away we go. I'm kind of surprised. I kind of figured it would say how sweet it is. That's something he would always say. Kind of a catchphrase from his shows. Let's see. There he is. Jackie Gleason. 1916 to 1987. And over here is his wife, Marilyn Gleason. She was not his first wife, but he was in love with her when he was married, and his first wife didn't want to give him a divorce. So he ended up not being able to be with Marilyn, and then Marilyn got married, and he found out years later that she was divorced, so he got a divorce and immediately married her. She lived till 2019. What a long life. Jackie passed in 1987. One of the interesting things is that he was actually the first time I ever recall hearing of someone dying, knowing what death was. I remember it was the summer, and I was staying with my grandparents while my parents worked, and I remember waking up and my grandmother telling my grandpa that she saw on the news that morning that Jackie Gleason had died. And I knew who he was because Honeymooners reruns were very popular even when I was 6, so. But I remember her saying even then, well, I read that he was known for smoking 5 packs of cigarettes a day, and that's very true. Now, I mentioned that he loved to live large, but it didn't always start out that way. When he was a kid, he had a rough childhood, actually. He grew up in Brooklyn, and his mom and dad fought like the Cramdens, basically, when he was a little kid. When he was 3 years old, his older brother died of meningitis, and so because of that, his mother was always very protective of Jackie for a long time. When he was a little kid, she didn't even let him go outside and play because she was afraid she would lose her only baby. You know, she was terrified he was going to get sick and pass away. And his father used to take Jackie to the silent movies, and that's when Jackie discovered that he wanted to be on screen. He wanted to be an entertainer, and he would make his childhood friends laugh in school, and he said you just couldn't replace that feeling that you got when you got laughter from people. So he always was chasing that. But at the age of 8 years old, his father ended up going to work one day and not coming home, and his mother ended up taking a job as a toll booth worker, and then basically just was too stressed to work. And Jackie would go work in billiard halls and things when he was starting at 12 years old, racking games for people in the pool halls. So of course, as you can imagine, Jackie learned how to play pool and got really good and eventually became like a pool shark. So when he ended up doing The Hustler with Paul Newman, and he did all those trick shots playing Fats, he actually could do those. Those were actually him doing those shots. So at the age of 19, unfortunately, Jackie's mom ended up passing away and left him an orphan. And he didn't have anywhere to stay, had no money, literally less than $1 in his pocket. So he and a friend ended up getting a apartment in the city, and Jackie started taking kind of odd jobs, and then eventually started working in nightclubs doing these MC acts. And he was bad. He said he knew he was bad. He was doing bad imitations of people and pretty bad jokes, but he occasionally would get a laugh, and he liked it. And then he said it all changed one night when he was doing a performance, and after his first set, the owner called him over and started putting money in the payphone and called New York with Jackie right in front of him and said, "Why did you send me this guy? He's terrible. Don't ever send me anybody like this again." And hung up, and then looked at Jackie and said, "You want a couple of drinks?" So they started drinking, and Jackie said he had a ton of drinks, and then when he went up, he was doing what would become his classic somersaults and doing all kinds of crazy things on stage, and got a huge reaction from the crowd. And afterward came off stage, and the same man that had reprimanded him for not doing a good show the first set said, "Why didn't you do that the first time?" And Jackie said, "I was just trying to feel out the crowd." So he ended up getting some pretty good gigs when he went back to New York after that, and was noticed by Jack Warner. Was in the crowd one night, thought Jackie was funny, and ended up offering him a contract to go to Hollywood. So Jackie did move to Hollywood and started doing character parts in basically gangster movies and things like that, and really wasn't feeling fulfilled. He wasn't really getting much of anywhere. So when his contract ran out, he basically took off, went back to New York, and started doing the clubs again. And then a man who owned Dumont saw him performing in New York and asked him to take over a TV show called The Cavalcade of Stars, and Jackie basically there would be a host and would get to do all kinds of comedy routines and various things that he basically ended up drawing from to create the Honeymooners. So he signs on to do a television show, and it was supposed to be for 2 years with a pretty good contract. I mean, it was pretty lucrative, and the show was an instant success. The problem was that a lot of the actors on the show really didn't like working with him because he didn't like to learn a script. He most days said he wouldn't even read the script until the day of the show. He didn't memorize lines. He kind of liked to ad-lib and do things. He claimed it was because he thought the spontaneity was better for television, that if you already knew the jokes, if you already saw the props and stuff, that it kind of ruined it. But to the other actors, that's what they were used to, and they didn't like it. And they had to end up learning how to deal with it, because they ended up doing a season of like 37 episodes of this show or whatever. But originally it was not easy for them to work with him. But he always got big laughs, and of course the stars of the show all worked in a great dynamic, because like he would say, Ralph Cramden was basically everybody that he grew up with. It was this guy who had very limited ability, just trying to make a living, do the best for his family, and he always has a get-rich-quick scheme that he's trying to do with one of his goofy buddies that always ends up blowing up in his face, and his wife is always there to support him in the end. And that was what the show was. But his buddy who was on the show, who played Ed Norton, Art Carney, they did not get along during the making of this show. I don't know what all the reasons were. Art Carney, it was said that Art Carney didn't like that Jackie was unprofessional, didn't learn the lines, didn't know the script. Jackie, I had heard, had told, I believe it was Orson Welles, that he was just kind of like, his ego couldn't take Norton getting the laughs. That he said even though he was kind of smiling on the outside, every time Art Carney got a laugh, it was like eating him away inside. You almost have to wonder if that's the reason the show ended, you know what I mean? Like, Jackie Gleason never received an Emmy or anything from any of the work on television, but Art Carney and everybody else that was on the show ended up getting stuff eventually, and that always kind of bugged him. But you almost wonder if the fact that it was becoming a star vehicle for other people, if that didn't bother him, because he said at the end of the year, he just said he didn't want to do it anymore. He told the studio, I don't want to be on the show anymore, and I don't want to do it anymore. And they thought that he was trying to use his leverage, like he already had another job offer, but he said he didn't. He just said, to him, they were running out of ideas, he thought, and they were on top in the ratings, and he said he thought that he would rather go out as #1 than to let the show suffer, so they just ended it after one season. And he and Art Carney did eventually get along. They said originally they would never work together again, but then they ended up working together, and Jackie ended up saying in an interview when he was asked how important Art Carney was to the Honeymooners, he said he probably was 90% of the reason it was successful. Then of course the Flintstones came out in the 70s, and everybody basically saw that was kind of like a cartoon version of the Honeymooners, and they said that at one point he was thinking of suing Hanna-Barbera, but his publicist said, do you really want to go down as the man that killed Fred Flintstone? So eventually Jackie ended up taking on a new show. He took on the Jackie Gleason show, and when they decided to do this show, it was a big hit. He was basically doing all the pratfalls and everything, doing improvisation, all the stuff that he always loved. He was getting to do that again, and had a pretty big deal. I mean, literally, like, the financial deal was like $11 million when he made it, and he wasn't even awake for the deal. He showed up to the meeting, was hungover, and ended up falling asleep for the meeting. And when his agent and the head of the studio started talking, the head of the studio looked at Jackie asleep and said, well, if that's how he feels about it, I mean, I guess I should just give him what he wants, because guy's so relaxed, you know, it's like he's so relaxed he doesn't care, that he's probably willing to walk away. So Jackie got to do the show, but one of the stipulations was that he wanted to, you know, he loved golf and he loved warm weather. He wanted to do the show in Miami, and so they ended up doing the Jackie Gleason show in Miami Beach. So we're going to go over to the theater where they filmed that. Of course, a lot of us probably know him from his movie roles. He was in The Hustler, and he was in countless things, but especially like Smokey and the Bandit and The Toy, things like that. Really great movies. He, in fact, didn't want to do anything at the end of his life because he was getting really sick. He'd had a heart attack, and he had diabetes, and he had all kinds of various health issues. In the end, I think it was actually colon cancer, I believe, that he ended up dying from. But he had always lived like a fast life and everything, and at the end he wasn't feeling great. But Nothing in Common came along, and Gary Marshall wanted him to be in it, and he didn't want to do it with Tom Hanks. But Gary said, do you really want Smokey and the Bandit 3 to be what people remember you for? Jackie made a lot of money in his life as an entertainer, and most of the time he liked living in hotels. He loved that lifestyle. He loved to live a fast life. He would even say most of his days when he lived in New York City, he would be at the bar before the bar even opened, have a couple of drinks while they were opening, take off after a couple of hours. About 4 o'clock he'd take off, go home, take a shower, change clothes, come back, and he would drink again with all the same people. And to him it was just, you know, it was like heaven. And he went to this famous bar that Frank Sinatra and all these famous athletes, Mickey Mantle and all these guys would go, and he would go hang out with those people. He would always buy people drinks. He was notorious for being very, very generous with his money. If he knew people needed money, he gave them the money. And he would always say, you know, it's probably because I grew up poor and we didn't have hardly any furniture or anything, that he said, I just always felt like I wanted to enjoy the money while I was alive and not worry about later. Not a bad place to rest for eternity, huh? Even though he enjoyed hotels primarily, he did have a home with his wife. and we'll go check that out too. Jackie talked the studio into letting him move it all out here to Miami Beach, where he would very often claim that his Miami Beach audience was the greatest audience in the world. He would always talk about how much he loved Miami Beach. So the Fillmore is now known as the Jackie Gleason Theater. He was known as the Great One because that was a name bestowed upon him by Orson Welles at one point. But Lucille Ball called him it so frequently that everybody started calling him it. And you know he must be the Great One if he's able to sleep his way through a contract negotiation that gets him $11 million. Basically, he had had various forms of the Jackie Gleason show before, and this one he had Art Carney on, and it was really good. They actually did 8 seasons of it and got a couple of Emmy nominations and everything. But apparently when 1969 came around, Jackie lost a bunch of weight and Art Carney had gained some weight, and so during this show, when they brought it back in, it was a kind of a variety show where he would do all kinds of skits and stuff, but he did a comedic musical version of the Honeymooners on this show. And the dynamic of the Honeymooners was kind of that Ralph was heavy and heavier than Norton, so I guess people thought that wasn't quite as funny, and apparently CBS was trying to go for a younger demographic, and they only wanted at one point Jackie to just do the Honeymooner stuff and to drop all the other stuff, so he didn't want to do that. Yeah, that's what he used to say at the end of every show. Fortunately, the doors are locked, but we can look through and see what the inside of the lobby looks like. Very cool. Now, he was known for being a big drinker, but he said on performance days he didn't drink originally, that was like the one day out of the week where he didn't. But then they said later on when he was doing this show that he would actually have someone bring him out quote unquote coffee or tea or whatever during the show, and he would take a sip and say how sweet it is, but it was actually always his beloved scotch. He loves scotch on the rocks. I was hoping we'd encounter a Jackie Gleason statue on the property, but I won't complain about a mermaid. Okay, I guess they consider this their Jackie Gleason statue. And I'm not kidding. It literally says Jackie Gleason on there. Known as Ralph Cramden from the Honeymooners, theater broadcast his television variety show from 64 to 70. That's funny, online I read 66. It was built in 1950 as part of the complex, the Miami Beach Convention Center. Originally called the Miami Beach Auditorium, it became the Theater of Performing Arts in 1976. And they renamed it in Jackie Gleason's honor, Jackie Gleason Theater, 1987, after his death. Okay. We're encountering a little bit of rain on the way to Jackie's last home. He had this home built in the 70s. He didn't often have houses. He liked to live out of hotels mostly. All right, we made it over to Louder Hill, is where it's called, where he lived. Well, unfortunately, I didn't know that Jackie lived in a gated community. Most of the places around here are not gated, but that's too bad. He had a custom-built 14-room mansion called Glee Manor that he lived in here, and it was really, you know, he had a UFO house that's kind of famous, but really this was his main real house because he always believed that the studios and everybody were just trying to give people money, like comedians and actors, big paychecks so they get used to the lifestyle, and then they would eventually, you know, just be submissive to anything the studios want them to do, because as he said, they would paint themselves into a box of a lifestyle they were afraid to give up. So when he finally built this was where he lived until he died. All right, one last stop so we don't end it on a bummer. So I came out to a place right up the road, right up Inverary. He lived in an area called the Inverary Hills, and it's Jackie Gleason Park. So they have a nice mural of him on the wall here. Now that house that he lived in this area, the reason he lived there is because
it was right next to the country club golf course, so he could go golfing all the time. And actually, when his wife sold the house, she sold it with everything in it. So just recently, I think a year or two ago, the house was up for sale again with all the stuff inside, and it was a custom built house. Still had some of his liquor that was made for him in there. And he used to host, Frank Sinatra was a guest at that house, Gerald Ford, and you can even see Gerald Ford is right up in here in the mural. There's Jackie playing golf. He loved playing golf. Ralph Cramden. We got all kinds of great images in here. He was one heck of a dancer too. He said that his weight fluctuated quite a bit because he just loved to eat and drink and stuff, and he said that never bothered him. The only thing that bothered him was that he liked to wear stylish suits, and sometimes that made it hard to find clothes that he liked when he was heavy. Well, my friend's bummer on not getting to see the house. I would have loved to have seen it, or even, you know, talk to maybe the owners and tried to look inside if they were up for it or whatever. But yeah, there's paintings of Jackie and everything all over the place. But I feel like, you know, seeing the UFO house, we'll save that for another vlog. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you all next time. Have a great night and goodbye.